feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, I don't go by Eric Marchin anymore. It's Victor Von Doom now.
God damn it, we'll get into that later. Eric is wearing his Martin Scorsese MCU shirt, so get ready for his opinion. The hot take train is here. Today we are going to be reviewing Shawn Levy's Deadpool and Wolverine. And we'll also probably be talking about the Marvel Studios Hall H panel that just happened last night. So, which I think is very fitting because Eric, whenever we do these, or I make you do these MCU movie reviews, we also love to get into a conversation about, you know, the state of the MCU, where we are and where we are going moving forward. And we have some answers to that. We got a large pivot from Kang last night, and also some stuff in this movie that I don't know will have gigantic ramifications, but I mean, leading into Secret Wars, it might. Well, because we're putting this review out, a weekend after the movie, we're going to go full spoilers. Like, this is going to be talking about every detail in Deadpool and Wolverine, which is a very dizzying movie, both from whether you liked it or not, I think. Just because there's so much in there, and it'll work for you or it won't work for you. But I think it's definitely a hard one to talk about without talking about cameos and spoilers and things like that. So I think it's a perfect time for us to do this, especially being, you know, right after the Hall H panel and after the movie's been out for a weekend and seems to be doing very, very well. So it seems like most of you had probably already seen it by now and probably have an opinion on it. So
if you don't, you're one of the few.
The few, yeah. If you're indifferent, that's not how anything works anymore. Eric, how are you doing otherwise?
Well, Matt, we're coming to the end of July into August, and so, you know, this is that weird period where, you know, not a lot happens just because it's kind of, you know, the one time of the year where the summer movie season is starting to come to an end, but we have a couple of movies that are coming. Alien Romulus, yeah. Trap, things like that. But we're also getting ready for TIFF and Fan Expo. So, you know, there's this little grace period.
I'm going to Halifax. I'm going to Disney World. I'm moving.
Matt just decided to do all the things in August.
This summer, man. Yeah. This summer in general, man.
But in August in particular, it seems like you're busy nonstop. Yeah. But in terms of, like, you know, film and things like that, it's that one time of year where, you know, it's not a dead zone per se, but it is a nice grace period of feeling like, okay, this is the time to take that vacation or, you know, to recharge before, you know, heading into September or the end of August. And so I recently was at a screening of The Movie Man in Kawartha Lakes, which was great because the Highland Cinemas, I think, is one of truly the most spectacular movie theater palaces in all of Ontario and maybe the world in terms of what it represents and how it was made. There's really nothing else like it. You can go back on UMP and listen to my interview with director Matt Finlan, who sort of took this story about Keith Stata. And when you're watching you know, a movie like that in the movie theater that is being shown on the screen, I made the joke that it is the ultimate 4DX experience in the way that I think a lot of people really were gravitating towards Twisters in that format as well. And it's just also funny thinking about it, connecting it back to Deadpool and Wolverine, that there were posters all over the place for that movie because I saw it on the Thursday afternoon, the movie. So
it was coming out that night, right?
So it was coming out that night. And so, yeah, so there's just like, if you love movie theaters and if you're close enough and live in the Ontario area, even if it's just once in your life, I highly recommend going to this theater.
How dare you talk about a small independent film and try to give people, when we're talking
an option.
we have to bow down to our gigantic
corporate overlords.
Overlords. And we're not allowed to speak about small, tiny cinemas or small independent films. We can only talk about gigantic $200+ million movies. But no, that's great. I wish I was able to go to that.
You'll get there though.
Yeah, I think I was kind of close. We were up at a cottage in Midland, which I think is, I don't even know. I don't know what lake or whatever. It was only an hour and a half from Toronto. Tiny township is where we were. That was fun. My dad locked his keys in his van the minute he got to the cottage, so that was
dad
fun.
move.
Everyone who's tuning into this is like, just shut up and talk about Deadpool and Wolverine. Hey everybody, we're going to talk about my cottage experience first, which means I missed the press screening, so that's kind of tying it all together. But yeah, man, I had to call a locksmith at midnight in the middle of cottage country. That was pricey. And a wonderful start to a family vacation. But yeah, I had to miss the press screening of Deadpool and Wolverine, so I saw it on Thursday night in IMAX at Scotiabank in Toronto, which is a real IMAX theater. None of the movie is in IMAX per se, but I'll start there by going. I'm very glad I went to go see this on Thursday night with the real fans.
Knew that was
I'm just
coming.
Imagine I just double down and just become that guy now.
Yeah,
that'd be great. That'd
John
be fantastic.
Campion Jr.
John but Campion I mean, sincerely, I do. I miss that a little bit because I think seeing it at those press screenings are very different, and I feel like a very different atmosphere. And I think that much like you talked about, if I pull off one of your points again with the 4DX Twisters thing, and I even made a point last week where I mean, I'm contradicting myself saying, a movie, if it has to be seen in a certain format, doesn't necessarily mean it's a good movie or adds to that movie. It means that you need some sort of gimmick to enjoy it. And I'm not saying that about this movie, but as someone who has been a hardcore, MCU fan since the beginning and has become obsessed with it at a certain time leading up into Endgame, has waned in the Ultron era and a little bit in this multiverse saga. But then someone who, had seen every one of these superhero movies that we're about to reference or that they've referenced and brought up in this thing, it was fun to see it with a crowd of people that were as passionate about it and as into it as I, and who have committed as many years to watching shitty superhero movies or other things. So I know we're going to go back and forth on, how that's going to make you feel, whether it's me or you or whoever's listening. But it was kind of a blessing in disguise missing that press screening, because I forgot what that Thursday night event cinema experience was like. Because for people who don't go to these press screenings, it's like a little inside baseball, but like you're there with, a half theater full at most. That's at the busiest screenings, maybe a quarter full. And was this one packed?
This was full. This was at the Cineplex Yonge and Dundas, the Limax, and this was the busiest I've ever seen a press.
But it's still not full, right? Like
it was almost full. There were maybe like 2 or 3 seats in between people.
In between every group of
people.
So you're saying like half full, 3/4 full, maybe.
Yeah, and to the point where like usually film critics watching a movie like this are dead inside and don't respond.
But there was some good reactions.
There was a lot of reactions to this, and there was reactions to things that the director and Shawn Levy and Ryan Reynolds would want those reactions, like the clapping and the cheering and the holy shit. It was audible throughout the entire theater, to the point where, not yucking anyone's yum, but I think that can also sometimes be obnoxious where, it feels like there's sometimes, for critic screenings, I'm saying, there is like almost a performative nature to it, because there are people that we know that it does feel as though there are times where it's about being the loudest voice in the room, and I
Sure.
think that's also the case when it comes to
I'm sure that
reactions.
plays into it. Like even me reacting, watching it on Thursday, I love a collective reaction from an entire theater, and you got a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's fine. I get what you're saying, because I'm not someone who I might audibly react or punch you in the leg or kind of whisper something to you when we're watching a movie, but I'm not one to have strong emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't show my emotion. I have strong emotions. I cry a lot. I do all this other shit, but like I don't in a movie very rarely. But internally, I might be freaking out and things like that.
Or as soon as the movie ends, you'll have people saying right away,
"Oh, I hate
positive
that shit,
or
man."
negative.
Yeah, or negative. Need people to hear your opinion, and that happens more than often. You know, I hate that as well. I'm like,
I don't like it either.
So, anyways, we'll get that over with. So I'll kick it off because I'll start positively, and then we'll get into you.
Yeah.
Okay. How do I condense my thoughts? I think Deadpool and Wolverine is a dizzying movie that I want to see again to fully understand my opinion on it. But at this moment, I had a goddamn blast with it. I'll give some context of the first two Deadpool movies. I do enjoy, I to varying degrees. I don't think I think the first one came out at a time where we wanted something fresh and different from the superhero genre, being R-rated, being meta and self-referential in a comedy and things like that. I think it's what people wanted at that time. I think at times the comedy can be juvenile and not completely work. But then at other times, I think it can be very funny. And I think Ryan Reynolds, as much as I've said in the past, his shtick has waned on me. He's a guy that I did like earlier in his career, and then the more he kept doing the same shtick, it kind of waned on me. But I do think that he's perfect as this character. And then I rewatched both Deadpool 1, 2, and Logan right before seeing this. Enjoyed them both. I mean, I absolutely love Logan. I think it's one of the best superhero movies of all time, if not the best one. But Deadpool 1 and 2, at times I found myself going, that joke's bad, or it's just too much or something like that. But then overall, I just think they're fun movies that poked fun at the Fox universe, poked fun at superhero movies, and really enjoyed them. So going into this of being Deadpool getting brought into the MCU, and then you have all this history with all these different, Fox movies, New Line movies, superhero movies that have come before. What I mean by dizzying is that there's so much thrown at this, whether it's sincere moments continuing, Logan and Wolverine's story, whether it's, continuing the story of Deadpool 1 and 2 with Wade Wilson and his love story, or his story of self-worth and being taken seriously. You have the stories of characters that have lived and died between 25 and 30 years ago and less. You have an MCU continuing story involving the TVA and the multiverse, and it has everything in the kitchen sink in it. And I think a lot of that works for me, and some of it doesn't. And the more I've sat on it, I think I've dipped from my 4.5 really high to a little bit lower than that. But I do want to see it again. And I really enjoyed it. I thought, again, comedy, very subjective. I think there's still a lot of that juvenile stuff in there. But I think some of the meta self-aware kind of jokes about the MCU and all those and all the Fox movies and things like that, and Deadpool and things like that, a lot of it works and a lot of it doesn't. I think it does a good job continuing the story from Deadpool 1 and 2, because I didn't expect it to necessarily do that. I thought it'd be a very MCU heavy kind of just focus. And while that's a big part of it, it really does continue the story of Deadpool 1 and 2. I even think what they do with Wolverine and Logan, I think solidifies why I think multiverse stories can work. And I think the people who say like, oh well, it's hard to give a shit when you just have unlimited variants out there. I think personally, like, they did a good job showing me why Wolverine and Logan is a great character by showing another version of Wolverine, and just solidifying that character growth from the overall character, because every Wolverine is a certain way, and there's a great scene between X-23 and um, and Wolverine that I think kind of showcases that. And um, I like the stuff that they do with the multiverse, and as much as silly and stupid as it is of where they're going, I think using the TVA was really smart. I think the action sequences I had a blast with. I think it might be like the way that they're shot, the weakest part of the movie, just because I don't think Shawn Levy's like a good action director. So I like the action sequences basically as a concept and elements of them. I just wish they visually looked more interesting, if that makes sense. Um, Talking about all the characters involved, I'm gonna go, and then Eric, you can go off right after I'm done. I'm just gonna keep going. Um, I'm so glad. I know we talk about spoilers and cameos and shit like that. And if a spoiler is truly spoiled when you learn about it, then it's not necessarily a good, element of a film, right? Like if you found out Chris Evans is in this movie, or as Johnny Storm, and or Wesley Snipes as Blade or anything like that, Channing Tatum, and we'll get into all that. If that spoils the movie for you, then like it's not really a good element of the movie. But I am glad I didn't know anything about that. I think the Channing Tatum stuff is both great and horrible, in the sense of when you get to a point in a franchise where you're getting so niche about your references, in the sense of, yeah, I know this was big news that he was announced and he came out on Comic-Con about him doing a Gambit movie, but that's for the hardcore fucking nerds, right? Like it's not necessarily for anyone else, because those are the people who know about that, where my mom isn't necessarily going to know, who loves the MCU and loves superhero movies, is going to be confused why Channing Tatum is there as Gambit, and that can work or maybe not work depending on the person. And my point with all that, and then bringing back Wesley Snipes and Elektra and all these terrible characters, not Blade's actually fine, Johnny Storm and Chris Evans, like I loved it. I definitely understand the other side of things, and I definitely understand when you get into a point where you go so niche with some of these references or referencing, you have to be a hardcore fan to kind of get all of it. Is kind of, it alienates a large group of people, and I can understand, some frustration there of being like, well, this is truly made for the fans. And I hate that saying, but it is made for sickos like me, who have watched every single fucking superhero movie since I was a kid, who watched all the bad Fantastic Fours, who watched Blade, who watched Elektra, who watched Daredevil, who watched all the X-Men movies and like sat there and obsessed over them because that's all we had at the time, and things like that. And whether I liked them at the time or didn't like them at the time when I was a kid, I thought it was a fun kind of, both poking fun at those movies and people's opinion on them and what the actors think of a lot of those movies, and kind of celebrating that, like, hey, you've watched all these, and it's a comic booky ass comic movie. Like, it's just, in comic books they bring back characters all the time, or different characters from different things. It's like Fantastic Four can show up in a Spider-Man comic and blah 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 blah. And movies, that's harder to do because actors are attached to that. So I think it was kind of fun to get really fucking comic booky and just bring in all these actors who haven't played these roles in so long, and have them and be like these forgotten things that everyone either makes fun of, and you bring them together as these kind of outcasts. And Ryan Reynolds playing this character for the better part of fucking 20 years, like if you include Blade Trinity. Like, it's like I kind of do include Blade Trinities, because he's playing Wade Wilson in that movie, right? Like,
well, he's always playing Wade Wilson.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. And but just, I'm talking about a character, right? And these characters, and I was surprised at how much I gave a shit emotionally by the end of the movie. Like, I felt like it all completely worked for me, whether it was as silly as Wade Wilson wanting to be taken seriously and be an actual hero, or Logan, again wanting to just do the right thing even though he's not the right guy, or he feels like he's not and doubts himself, or like he's so tortured and things like that. But always something, rewatching Logan, it really hammers that down even more so than this movie, obviously, so it might be derivative and not needed, and I get that. but I just thought I don't know, it all came together in a way that I'm like, I had a lot of fun with this, and I really do think it rewards people that have stuck it out and watched all of these movies. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Like, I see people being like, pandering, it's fan service, it's blah 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 blah, and I'm like, yeah, sure, but who fucking cares? That's who you're making this stuff for. And I think as long as those people are respectful and just enjoy the movie, and it's a conversation me and you have all the time, it's like, yeah, you don't want to pander to the Snyderverse guys because they're fucking assholes. Like, it's just like, but if you're pandering to people who are paying you a lot of money to go see these things, I'm like, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. That's just listening to fans. And I think pivoting and giving people what they quote unquote want, even if it's someone who either doesn't enjoy this shit, or if it's objectively not a great movie because it's doing this shit. I'm like, what is objectively not a good movie? I'm like, it's not, it's just, you're not better than anyone because you disliked it because it's a cameo fest or blah 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 blah. But like, I had fun. I thought it was well paced, uh enjoyable ride. I liked what they do with the state of the MCU, and there's some stuff I don't like too. So I don't necessarily like all the Deadpool variants at the end. I didn't like Nice Pool that much. Which I think it's sort of funny at first, but then overstays its welcome, right?
Like Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, which is fine. But I've come around on Ryan Reynolds again. So, I loved it. I think it's made for, people who are obsessed with comic books and comic book movies. And does that make it, is it going to win awards? No. Is it one of the best movies of the year? No. Did I enjoy it like it was? Absolutely. And I can't wait to see it again. Just to both, I think a lot of times I love getting my initial gut reaction out for a movie, but a lot of times I don't understand how I truly feel about something until I see it again with tempered expectations, knowing all those cameos were there. And I can actually like sit and just watch the movie, because what I mean by dizzying, to bring my point all around, is like, there's every 2 seconds I was like, what the fuck is going on? like I was so surprised by many things, but it can be distracting. And when your focus is on the two titular characters, when you have so much of this other stuff in there too, and trying to pay homage or celebrate or whatever, poke fun at all these other characters too, it can be a lot. So it was a lot. It was dizzying. I don't know if I even trust my feelings on it, but my initial gut reaction is that I enjoyed the shit out of it, and I can't wait to see where the MCU goes next. Like, we've gotten some good stuff in the multiverse saga, and I'm not saying this is the best of it. We've seen it done more sincerely in No Way Home, or better in Loki, and things like that. But I think it's just a fun, silly kind of meta superhero satire with some heart. I just kind of vibed with it and really liked it. So anyways, that's my giant monologue. Let's hear the opposite side of it. Eric, go ahead.
Well, Matt, I gotta start by saying I really appreciate everything you said, and I think actually you were quite critical of things that didn't work for you in the film, and that's something that, like, I think any critic can bring to the table when it comes to talking about something that they like. They can still be critical of aspects in a negative way that don't work in a film that they like, and be positive about certain things in a movie that they're negative towards. And I will bring some positivity towards mostly negative reaction and response to a film. And one character I could do without in all capacities at this point. And I think a lot of it does hinge on Deadpool, in terms of like where you're coming from in the perspective of, do you like Ryan Reynolds? Do you like that fourth wall breaking meta shtick? Do you enjoy the character and the world enough to get on board with a third film in the franchise? Because it did feel like, after the first movie, which you know, I didn't like that film either, but I get in terms of like it was shaking up the superhero genre in the same way that I think when we talked about Joker, you know, there's a flip side of the coin to that movie where if you're looking at it from the perspective of a superhero film, it's doing a lot of things differently in terms of, you know, trying to break the formula. But if you look at it as just a movie within the realm of blockbusters and film in general, well, you know, in the case of Joker, it's not dissimilar to a Scorsese movie, or it's not dissimilar to any
Sure.
crime film, where I think with Deadpool, like you can look at like the meta quality. Well, you know, like something like Scream, you know, was poking fun at the genre that it was in, you know, way before horror movies were doing that on a regular basis in terms of a commercial aspect. So, you know, it's not really anything new within the context of film, but within the superhero genre, it was kind of like, you know, this moment of feeling as though you were getting something a little different, and it was making fun of it. So, you know, and I never want to yuck anybody's yum, and you know, like I get the excitement, and the thing that bothers me the most about, you know, people attacking those that don't like it, that will say, you know, it's all about fan service. And I think fan service can be a good thing too. I am a fan of comic books and comic book movies, and I also grew up with all this stuff. And I just felt that this film, you know, like part of me admired it for being so, because the biggest problem I have with this movie, and like a lot of people will call an art film pretentious or esoteric, this movie is that. This movie is
on the opposite side of it.
Yeah, but it still is pretentious in the sense of it's expecting you to know all of not only the lore of film and television, but as you mentioned, the inside baseball, not only of, you know, the you know, the corporate side of things when it comes to, you know, the Channing Tatum of it all, you know, the dark universe before the dark universe.
Sure, yeah.
But it's also expecting you to know, you know, a little bit about the Fox Disney merger. It's also expecting you to know, you know, things about, you know, people's lives outside of the film. I think weirdly, this movie almost plays as though it's a film about exes in a weird way, where you have, you know, the idea that Deadpool is divorcing himself from Fox, or what Fox was. You know, you have a joke that's made in the film about Hugh Jackman, who has recently separated from his spouse. You have a story about Deadpool and Vanessa separating. You know, there's a joke that Elektra makes about Daredevil. And then even the thinking of, if you want to go even more meta, and I think it's fair to have this comparison or to include this as an example, is that I also always forget that Ryan Reynolds used to be married to Scarlett Johansson, who was also a part of this franchise. So in a weird way, like, it does feel like a movie about like letting go of,
and the X-Men.
Exactly. So I do feel like there is an aspect of it's like letting go of that point of your life or moving on from it. My biggest problem with that, and it reminded me actually a lot of Air, was I think it worships and eulogizes Fox. And I am not a fan of any worshiping of a corporation. You know, I've always said this, even with, you know, Neon and A24 movies, and Marvel is included in this, where it's always a case-by-case basis. You know, each film, I think, should be evaluated on its own merits, you know, and obviously context helps in terms of if it's a sequel to something and maybe it brings more to it because it's, you know, referencing stuff from a past film or franchise. But when you start like saying like, oh, you know what, like Fox made a lot of weird and wonderful, you know, superhero movies and blah, blah, blah. That to me feels a little bit disingenuous in terms of what you're representing here, because a corporation is not a character. A corporation is not a human being. And so to feel any sympathy or emotion for that, I have no patience for. And I think that is truly like the one thing I do find a little heinous, because I think corporations also can, you know, really hurt a lot of people. And
sure.
Fox, Fox was no exception to this. Rose tinted glasses can only go so far. And so when you're watching this, I think like that's a part that I couldn't immerse myself in, was like the eulogizing or the mourning of a corporation, and it kind of felt like that throughout. When we're looking at Deadpool as a character, because Reynolds is such a he's very much doing that, like it's on the same level of Jim Carrey in the 90s, right, where you had Jim Carrey as in this moment of time where like everything he did, from Batman Forever to Dumb and Dumber, which I think is his best performance, to Ace Ventura, you had all of these movies and this movie star, and then it kind of he outstays his welcome, or like people grow up and move on. It feels the same way with Reynolds, but Reynolds as an actor, I think he knows his strengths, or he knows like what he's playing to, and that is fine. But I think if you are not interested in his style of humor, this is going to be a really tough sit.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the only time I ever laughed in this entire movie was the mention of the Honda Odyssey. And the reason for that was because Ryan Reynolds was on a Canadian show in the 90s and early 2000s on CBC. This is going
to be the most Eric
you might have known ever. This show, though. The Odyssey. The Odyssey. Yeah. And he's sure. Actually, this is one of the few roles I actually like Ryan Reynolds in. And I actually think he's quite good in Adventureland. And I think why he works so well in Adventureland is because he's such a poser. In Adventureland, he's so insecure about his image that he's willing to convince a younger kid that he's cool and saying things that the kid wants to hear, or pretending that he's listened to Lou Reed, based on his own, feelings of rejection from his own peer group. And I think that really works. The problem with Deadpool on an emotional level is I felt none of his self-worth or concern for the people he quote unquote cares about is genuinely earned, because we don't know these people that well. Even over the course of 3 films, most of them are sidelined.
I'd say Vanessa's the only one.
And he always makes fun of them, to the point where even in the film you have Wolverine saying, "You call her Blind Al." Like, why would you call your friend that? Like, that's so ableist in such a weird way. And so like for that, it's like I don't have any emotional I don't have any empathy for Deadpool and thinking like, oh, is he going to save the people he cares about? Because he doesn't care about these people. He doesn't. I will agree with
you. I'll give you that. Yeah. I don't. I think Wolverine, Hugh Jackman's doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
We'll get there. And I think partly with Wolverine and with Hugh Jackman's performance, a big part of why you do have that emotional connection is because you've spent, over 2 decades now with this character, and specifically with this one actor,
movies.
Right? And there's also a joke that you'll be playing him until you're in your 90s. So,
probably going to be true.
so for us, because we grew up with that character, we have a connection to him and a bond. And I actually do think Hugh Jackman is very good in this film. I think
there's a positive, baby. Let's go.
What bothers me about how his performance is treated is every time you have something sincere that comes from Jackman, and Jackman's also a much better actor than Ryan Reynolds.
Undercut with a joke.
It's always undercut by a joke. It's always undercut by something so stupid that it feels like you are, you're having this moment to like sit in it, to really sit and stew in what is going on. And it's taken away from you. And Reynolds,
I'd say that X-23 scene is the one time where it's not undercut.
This is the other positive thing that I will say about the film. I think Daphne Keane is fantastic in this movie. I also think she was great in Logan. And I think she has a movie star quality to the point where I think even maybe, I don't know if it was in the scripting stage or during the filmmaking, because, films change as you're writing and shooting and editing. I think they realized that like even moving forward, I wouldn't be surprised if she's more a part of the MCU, because the way that they
that's why
include
she's
her
brought in at the
end, yeah, and she is very good, and she brings she's the reason why I gave this movie a half a star and 1.5 instead of just 1.
God damn, I hate you.
but she's generally good, and I think like that relationship, even with the worst Wolverine, works in terms of how you play with the emotion of the character and how you play with feeling as though you've let down your world and you have nothing left and you're just an empty vessel. But there's a lot of stuff where, like, I think there is a valid criticism, because I with Channing Tatum, Jennifer Garner, and Wesley Snipes, I don't think they're cameos. I think they're actual real roles. Like, it's not
even
just
Chris Evans, as I know that's more of a cameo. But I was surprised at how much. I thought he'd be dead in the first sequence.
Henry Cavill as Wolverine is a cameo, right? Where
which you almost forget happens. That's what I mean by the dizzying component of it.
Yeah, and so the Deadpools are fucking terrible. Even Dogpool is awful. To the point where you're just thinking,
I don't disagree.
You're just reminded of why that character works best either on his own, like one is enough, or you need to partner him, because like what they're doing here is like that classic, you have the stoic straight man in Logan, and then you have the silly sod in Deadpool, and so I think that dynamic, that formula also is tried and true, and it works for so many different films. But when you're watching something like this, I think if you're only interested in one of the characters, especially the one that doesn't speak as much, it becomes harder to kind of focus on his journey than it is, the class clown, cutting up the scenes. You mentioned Shawn Levy, and I think Shawn Levy as a director has limitations, to the point where, like, even the opening credits of this movie, they almost feel like they're either AI generated or they just let like the template version of it be used.
I get what you're saying,
because like when you have like the dancing specifically,
it felt disjointed. Like when you cut from I like the idea of using Wolverine's adamantium skeleton to kill all these guys and his corpse essentially, but that whole opening credit sequence, I'm with you. There felt something with the slow motion and then the cutting to the dances that felt weirdly. I laughed and I liked using Bye Bye Bye, although shout out to
Sean Baker for Red Rocket. But to be fair to X-Men, they do use that song in X2 in a scene where they're leaving the mansion, and Aaron Stanford's character Pyro's also in the car with
well, there you
Wolverine.
Go. There's a call back there.
Yeah, but in terms of, and that's the other thing, even with the music cues, it's odd because like obviously not a lot of people have seen Red Rocket, or like the number of people that are going to see Deadpool and Wolverine compared to Red Rocket is a vast difference. But I look at how creatively Red Rocket uses Bye Bye Bye, and then I also look at like how creatively I'm With You is used in Emma Sligman's Bottoms, the Avril Lavigne song. And it doesn't feel like any of the songs, even with, Like a Prayer, it doesn't feel like any of the songs are truly like moving forward. Like they're ingrained in your mind of like, oh, this song.
What a great use of that.
Yeah. Because it like you think like with Reservoir Dogs, you think, Stealers Wheel, right? Stuck in the Middle with
I
You.
agree.
Or and so like, or even more recent.
Fun music, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it was like, oh, that's attached to that scene and was a perfect use of that song. Like I think the soundtrack is great, but because just they're all great songs used in a superhero movie. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's partly ironic, it's partly him doing like a big shiny tunes kind of thing, and also it is a little bit like leftovers of even Guardians a little bit, where it's like you're bringing in pop culture that people are familiar with, that maybe moms and dads and people that grew up in the 2000s, in the way that Reynolds kind of came into his career at that point, can enjoy, and it feels maybe less alienating when you have Channing Tatum and you're thinking to yourself, wait, what movie did I miss with him being in it? And I think you already covered it pretty well in terms of, like, you know, I think as the two of us are in the industry in terms of, you know, being critics, and it's a part of our lives, and we're always sort of reading and watching, and we know this stuff, it's not a problem for us. But because, you know, you have so many people that are coming to this being like, okay, well, I've committed to the films, I've now committed to the series, but now you're also telling me, in also non-canon movies and non-canon series and references, but now you're also telling me I have to be up to date on casting rumors and things that didn't happen. And like, that's a lot for an audience. And like, again, I'm not against that per se, because I feel like, for example, like, you like this movie, and I really appreciate that you saw it, but like Holy Motors is a perfect.
I saw Holy Motors and
is a perfect example where I think people that are Leo Carax fans will get even more out of that movie, because the film is referencing his entire career. And so if you're coming into Holy Motors as your first Leo Carax movie, it
was for me, actually.
You might not get everything right away, right?
But I still liked it.
But you still liked it, which is great. And but I'm looking at it from the sense of, like, you know, I think that's a valid criticism of Holy Motors, where, like, if you're looking at it as a film on its own, it's harder to justify that to somebody that's like, oh, I want to see maybe an independently made, you know, international film that isn't, you know, like, that's just something different. Like, I wouldn't recommend Holy Motors right away to somebody. I'd say, like, go back to his earlier stuff first, but you can still enjoy it, but maybe you'll get more out of it if you know all this stuff too.
And I think I'm kind of agreeing with you, but I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with making a movie for a specific, you know, group of people, like, and referencing, like, I don't know. I'll be interested to see, like, when my mom sees this movie, she rewatched Deadpool 1, 2, and Logan, and she's an MCU sicko almost more than me. She rewatches the MCU like yearly, and like, it's like her comfort stuff she puts on all the time. She's seen all the X-Men movies. I don't know if she remembers seeing Fantastic Four and you know, Elektra and Blade and but she'll have no idea about the Channing Tatum thing, right? Or she'll have no idea about Henry Cavill rumors about Wolverine or something, right? So those are going to be the things where, are they so small in the movie, especially with the Henry Cavill thing, where she's going to be like, who even is that guy? And it won't even register.
Or why is Superman?
Or I don't even think she'll register, because he doesn't. I don't think you'll connect those dots if you're not even a little bit more hardcore. She might, but then with the Channing Tatum thing, it could just be like a funny, you know, I'm from 21 Jump Street playing goofy fucking characters and stuff like that, doing a really bad, you know, Cajun accent. Like, it could still work if you don't, like, I'm just trying to, I'm just playing.
From a logic, like the movie star aspect of it, I get it. Yeah. Like, it's Channing Tatum, he's here, but in terms of, like, Gambit in that character, and then, like, there is a feeling of, like, I think for people that maybe don't know it, where it's like, maybe am I missing something? Am I totally missing, like
why is he doing that? Why is he talking that way?
And that's where the frustration, and I think, like, because people don't want to feel as though they've either been tricked or they feel inferior in terms of, like, well, I did all the homework, I did the research, and I still don't get why Channing Tatum's here. Like, did I miss, like, a post-credit scene or something?
Sure.
You know?
But, like, in any movie, if someone's cast as someone, you don't necessarily need to know why. So, like, that's my argument there too, where, like, if you're just watching it out of context, you might go, oh, should I know why? Like, especially when you have him brought in with other characters that you probably either have seen their movies before or kind of know that they played those characters before, even if you hadn't seen those movies. So I kind of understand that they set you up that way, and then I do think you get more out of it if you're a sicko. Like, like myself or something. But
Yeah.
no, I totally understand that too.
Going back to Shawn Levy,
Yeah,
I want to go
please.
back
Yeah,
to
keep
Shawn
going.
Levy's
Yeah.
direction for a second, because the other scene that does
Strap
not
in,
work
everyone.
at all in terms of a piece of direction, and it also feels very computer generated, not in it like a visual effects way, but like just almost like you're watching a demo version of it and not like the real version of it, is the whole kind of like single take that goes down the
Of
street
them
when
running
you
through,
have,
killing all the, yeah.
yeah, like
I
especially
like,
like
again, I like the idea of it, and I
the
like some of
concept
the
is fine,
action.
but the execution of it feels off. Even
All the action
Cassandra,
felt that way, dude.
even Cassandra Nova, in terms of Emma Corrin's movements, there are times where I was wondering if they like put their face on another actor, because like it felt like the head was moving different to the body and the facial expressions were
I
different.
like the fingers through the face. I like
That's fine. That's fine. And that also, you know, like that feels like it is referencing Doctor Strange a little bit as well. Obviously, there is a direct Doctor Strange
sling
reference
ring. Yeah.
later, but that does feel like we're entering kind of like the supernatural territory of the MCU. Another big problem for me in terms of this film, I don't like the multiverse stuff that much. But I was also surprised with how much time they spend in the void. And I think the void itself just looks so bland. Like, I mean, they
Yeah.
make jokes about it being like a Mad Max ripoff wasteland. They mentioned
And a
Furiosa
garbage
too.
dump. Yeah.
And it just looks so one note that like I think you need more variety in a movie like that. Like they try to kind of move it a little bit into like a forest kind of sort of region in the Badlands and things like that, but it's shot so flatly and, you know, boring, and there's not a lot going on. And I think it's both a combination of Shawn Levy's direction and George Richmond's cinematography, where there's not much there to offer you, and so you're just kind of sitting there and looking at this thing, and you're just stuck in it for what feels like a good hour's worth of the film. And when you compare that to, like, you know, the set design of the TVA or any of the other locations that we've even seen in past Deadpool movies, there's more variety to it. And I think that that's another thing that kind
Good
of
point.
bothered me as well, where it's like you need to kind of change things up a little bit more than what there is
Instead of a giant dirt pile with some Easter eggs in the background.
yeah, and even like the casting of Aaron Stanford, pardon me, as Pyro again. It's like it's nice to see that actor get like a shot to do it, but then it's also like, okay, well, why him? Like I never felt like there was a real reason specifically for
that
him
character,
other than he defeats Johnny Storm. You know, like that feels like the only reason. Like it's a deep cut, but it's like I'm not sure what the deep cut is meant for, because there's so many other characters that you could also do that with or replace him with. And him being an informant of Mr. Paradox, it feels as though like, okay, well, you could still do that with
why
any other
that character.
Yeah.
You could have done a character, maybe someone more, no offense to him, but like it is kind of cool that it's a deep cut, but you could have maybe done someone more prominent from the X-Men movies or from something else,
or even if it was a smaller, because like he
character.
was one of those guys at in the moment, like he had a film called Tadpole, and he was kind of like an it actor in the moment, and then it just nothing happened for him.
Okay.
So, you know, and like Pyro like was kind of interesting in the sense of like the love triangle between, you know, Pac-Man's Rogue and Sean Ashmore's Iceman, but like it didn't really go anywhere in the third one either. So it just kind of felt like, oh, that kind of fizzled out. And here I was just questioning, like, okay, well, what's the logic behind this casting choice and this character being brought back in? Because I get the Elektra thing. I get, you know, Blade,
what they're doing with Blade and Elektra and all Johnny
these
Storm even.
And obviously the Johnny Storm thing, like you can say like, oh, it's like, I think critically looking at it, it's like, you know, it's him, like even though he's wearing
dude, at first, just to jump in, like I was so caught off guard. Like I heard, you know, we've been talking about this for a while, but I was so caught off guard when Chris Evans appears on screen that like for a second I was like, oh, is he like the Cap from when he's returning the time stones, did the TVA get him like while he was returning the stones because he was jumping around trying to return them? And I was like, for a second they got me, but then immediately I understood what they were doing.
I knew as soon as I saw
The
the
cloak on
cloak
him.
that he was wearing, because it's like that's the only reason why he's wearing the cloak, right? It's for an
Yeah.
audience reveal. In the same way that I don't mind, because it's like, okay, like that's a fun bit of like fan service. The one bit of fan service that I feel doesn't work, especially because you have a character that is so self-referential and irreverent, and that he would probably be making fun of Wolverine doing this, is that Wolverine coming out of the back of the Honda Odyssey in that fight sequence is just for the audience. It's not because the characters know he's there, and you kind of feel as though, well, Deadpool would kind of be making fun of him for like hiding in the trunk of this car, or be making some backdoor
or something,
jokes or something like that. And
there, you could be a Deadpool writer, man.
Sure. I mean, I'm a talentless hack, so like, why not? So
see, that's the condescending shit.
Well, no. I'm saying that about myself, not about the film.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to say with that is that it just feels like, okay, this. When this film thinks it's being edgy, it's really not. And that's the other problem I have with the comedy. Like, I didn't find it funny, but I don't think it's that edgy, because if it truly wanted to push some buttons, it would have said something about Jonathan Majors. It would have said something about the way that Kevin Feige handled the Kang situation. It would have, and they did reshoots, because this is a movie as well that we didn't talk about this really, is that it was affected by the writers and actors strike, to the point where it was still shooting during the writers strike, but they couldn't change the script. And then when the actors strike happened, they shut the whole thing down and they came back to it. So I'm sure they did reshoots, and a lot of Deadpool's dialogue always does sound like ADR.
The first two movies, it's worse than in this, because like I rewatched those first two movies and it is jarring. You can clearly tell which is ADR and what he's actually saying in the mask. And it's the one thing I really noticed in the first two movies. And again, I'd probably notice it more here on a rewatch or watching at home, because I'd be focused more on it. But
when he's wearing the mask, it's a little bit easier to loop things in, or like to kind of cut away from it. It's obviously not a Madam Web situation.
No, God, not that close. Yeah.
Which is also a worse movie than this. So I'll give Deadpool and Wolverine credit for that. It's more competent. But there's a part of it where it does feel like, okay, if you truly wanted to, be provocative or push the envelope in a way, you would bite the hand that feeds. You wouldn't just like, it feels like all the humor is exactly what you'd expect it to be. The only thing that, and it's not funny obviously, but the only thing I was shocked about was the use of the R word. And this is something where it's like, okay, well, you can justify in the sense that, it's a bad character, or like he's not a good person. And that's fine in the sense of like, if you're watching like an indie drama, or
and it's a horrible bad person who uses shitty language.
Yeah. But for this kind of movie and this era that we live in, like obviously you can go back to the 80s, and that was a very, it was common in the vocabulary, especially in teenagers. The F-bomb is also dropped quite a bit. Like you look at the Bill and Ted films, but for this kind of movie, you didn't need that word to be used.
I agree.
Here.
That's something.
And this word also, this is the big problem with using that word, because it's only used once, and it's said weirdly by Wesley Snipes in full, which I was really disappointed by, because I really do like Wesley Snipes as Blade. Is that it's almost like, how we talked about this with Dune and even The Wolf of Wall Street and Scarface, when bros or people watch films like this and they think like, oh, this is enabling me, this is how I should act and behave, or like,
it's okay, I'm gonna use the word,
and so
normalizes it.
And so when you're watching something like this, even to younger kids that are like preteens, or like maybe just like 12 to 14, they'll be watching it and they'll think like, oh, you know what? Well, it's fine as long as it's in jest, or it's glib, or like it, and it's like, well, no, it's not.
It's just a joke or whatever, right? Like, and I'm with you. Like, it's the one thing in the film I did laugh at a lot of the humor. I think it does push the envelope in certain moments. I agree with what you're saying. I was surprised at how they poked fun at the MCU, the low point joke and the multiverse stuff not working. And again, that's not super edgy, but I like that they even went there. Um, so and humor is very subjective. So
Yeah.
that's the one thing, like you brought up at the beginning. You're either on board with the Deadpool shtick and the Ryan Reynolds shtick, or you're not, right? And I think third movie in, you kind of already know that. So if you weren't in it on the first two movies, you're not going. Nothing is going to change you. You might like some of the Logan stuff, but like you're still gonna hate all the Deadpool stuff. When it comes to the R word, that's something I can completely agree with you on. And we've talked about this on many different shows and many different things of like, and there's some ableist, jokes in the movie. There's some ableist references in the movie for even, and it's almost like they find it's, if I call out that I'm being that way, it's okay for me to be that way. Right. And,
Well, and
if
it's
the
not like
characters-
that's the point.
No,
right?
I know that's the thing. And so the use of the R word, and I even forgot how it was used, and I forget it's Wesley Snipes is the one who mishears. Is it Juggernaut or someone?
No,
I
it's
feel like?
it's
Or
Deadpool.
Deadpool? No,
Yeah,
I thought it was
because they're talking. No,
Okay.
they're literally talking in like their
And
base or
Deadpool
whatever.
doesn't say it, right?
No,
But Wesley
Deadpool
Snipes
doesn't say
mishears
it,
him?
but he's and then Wesley Snipes says it, and then it goes back to Deadpool, and Deadpool's like, "Look, I don't want to be canceled. I already have enough
Yeah,
issues," and
Yeah,
and that's the point where it's
so
like you
it's
mentioned
played
it.
off as a joke, and I
Yeah.
get Blade. Blade is an anti-hero, I guess, but I forgot it was Blade. I thought it was more of a pure villain character that says it, because again,
No, it's
dizzying
Blade.
movie. There's so much going on, and my goldfish brain can't register everything sometimes, but that's actually even worse. Than I forgot that it's Blade, because like he is a quote unquote hero, right?
Yeah.
Like he is a good guy, so it's played off purely as a joke. And I don't, again, I'm not, I think in comedy a lot of things should be like, but that weirdly just feels like saying a slur as a joke.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
you were
just-
talking about this with, I mean, obviously not on this episode or anything, but we were talking about, because you're a fan of The Boys, and you were mentioning that this
Yeah.
last season has some stuff that feels a little bit more problematic than what they were going for in the past that they were referencing. And we've even talked about this with other, Disney products or Disney productions before, where anybody with a physical, or mental disability are often characters that are the punchline of one of these films. Like you look at a lot of the Pixar movies that have come up, like Finding Dory, there's a character, that's mocked for their disability. And it's such a strange thing that we live in, where
we're still okay doing that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like it's like the one or two things that it's like, okay, well, we'll cut you some slack here, even though it's still really like, it. Like if it's, or if you have to question yourself before you say it or reference it, or even to the point where you can't find the proper word to say instead.
Yeah.
That's where you have problems, and society as a whole still does, and it's such a cruel thing.
I really hate that word, and I
Yeah.
really hate that word, and I think it has no place in something like this. And I think in film, everything should be, we've touched very taboo subjects. People say some really horrible things, but it has to fit the character, right?
Yeah.
To your point. Like you can say anything and do anything in a movie if you either have the story to say, it's a character moment, like it really is essential to that character or the plot or the story or anything. I think you should be able to do basically almost anything, not anything, but almost anything, as long as it's, nothing illegal or horrible or anything like that. But that word played off purely for shock value and a laugh, I think is not okay. And that's the one thing I will absolutely agree with you on.
Yeah, and I also think, like, to your point, that this is more on me, because I know you'll disagree with me on this a little bit here, is that just because you reference something or say something or cut somebody to the quick in terms of getting to a point where you're thinking in your head, and you make fun of yourself or you make fun of the corporation or what have you, doesn't, I don't think, necessarily make you smart or funny in that way either. But I do feel
fruit sometimes.
Yeah, and I do feel it's like, well, we referenced it, so we know we got it, you know. The joke's on us first, but we got it, so we can laugh at it.
We're acknowledging what you think or whatever.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that doesn't really make you smart. That just that makes you self-aware. But
I'm just surprised that self-awareness was even like referenced.
Yeah, and I think it is different compared to what we have gotten. So because like we were talking about before with like Deadpool, the first one kind of being different and breaking the rules within the context of the superhero genre within the 20th Century Fox Studios X-Men movies and Marvel movies then. And it's like, okay, well, we need the same kind of thing now for the MCU because, as you mentioned, this past phase has been both turbulent because of everything that's gone on with Jonathan Majors and the Kang stuff, but then also the quality and it almost feeling somewhat directionless in terms of like when they were setting up Thanos, it felt like they had. They probably didn't have everything figured out.
But he was shown in Guardians, and they kind of had an idea.
They were built. They had a build. They had a bridge to build towards. They had something. They knew where they were going. Where it kind of felt like post Endgame, they were exploring. They were like, okay, well, maybe we need to reset the table, but we need to take the time to kind of bring in all these other characters. And this also is inside baseball stuff, where you have, like Bob Iger coming back and all this stuff where
the strike,
COVID, the cutting down of sequels and TV shows and thinking about even just thinking about this year, this is the only Marvel movie that is coming out in 2024.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a very good thing. I also think that the thing that hurts Deadpool and Wolverine a little bit, obviously there is some differences, but I think X-Men 97 was so clever with not only how it handled its social commentary, but how it handled the cameos. Even it felt
and nostalgia.
It felt like both fan service, but the fan service was not only earned, it worked within how they were able to bring some of those characters into the X-Men universe again. And even if it was just simply morph transforming into one of those characters, or we see something that is changing the entire world or affecting the world, and we see a quick shot of Spider-Man or something like that, it always felt like it was very considerate of where it put those cameos in. And I think maybe this is I think I'm weirdly defending Deadpool and Wolverine a little bit here. I think the cameos, it does coast on, okay, well, there's going to be some surprises here throughout the film. And I think when you're going into the movie, a lot of people that know about it or that know about there's going to be some references and things that I'm excited about. And, are we going to get a Taylor Swift cameo or what have you? And so you're going in watching this thing just purely on okay, I'm waiting for the next big reveal or the next, endorphin to be released in my brain to explode when I see Henry Cavill or something like that. And that's almost a disservice to the film in a way, because it's almost like you're trying to rush through the movie as quickly as possible because you want to get everything that the film has before it ends, if that makes sense. You're talking about the dizzying experience of watching it and maybe going back and kind of knowing how things play out. I almost feel it's the same thing when you're watching it for the first time. You're thinking about, okay, well, I want to see all these cameos. I want to see the reveals. I want to see the payoffs of the fruits of my labor of being so dedicated as a person. And it's almost unfair to the film because it's you're trying to get through it just on, filtering it as
what's in it and not what it's about. Or what it's doing.
Yeah. And so I think that almost can hurt it a little bit as well in terms of the gimmicky aspect of it. Where,
on both sides, I think it can hurt.
Yeah.
On the sense of someone's opinion on a positive side or just on a the dizzying experience. And I think the people who really don't like it can hurt it that way too, because it just
because you take out the cameos and what do you have, right?
Yeah,
Like
but
if
I
you
think it's like take out the characters and what do you have, and like you could say that about
well no
any
if you
movie,
focus
really.
on the story of Deadpool and
Sure.
Wolverine as kind of like an impromptu road trip buddy comedy film,
Of
that's kind
saving a
of
universe or saving,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
main story line, right? Like that's the thrust of the character arcs and their journey. You know, I think this movie, again, this is more of a positive, even though I don't really love Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but I think this movie does a better job of maybe giving you more of what you were expecting, because I
From
think a
that
lot of
movie,
people
yeah.
were with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness were expecting more and were ultimately disappointed by
I
it.
think this is a result of that, the reaction to
Yeah,
the movie.
because really you got one kind of multiverse scene, but that is a problem with this movie, where I was mentioning with The Void, where it's like, you know, these films have talked about multiverses. I feel like we haven't explored, you know, it's been the tip of the iceberg. And I look at this again, comparing it to animation, but like the way that Spider-Verse has explored so many different worlds, you know, animation or otherwise, it feels like we've gotten a complete spectrum of what is out there. With the multiverse, they just keep talking about it. It's like
Well, I
they,
think that's the difficulty between animation and live action,
yeah,
right? And I think you brought up the two things that have gotten the closest to it, which is the Illuminati scene in Doctor Strange and this entire movie, pretty much,
yeah,
right? Like it's it's only really exploring a multiverse in the sense of, okay, now all these Marvel superhero movies are connected. That's basically what this movie confirms. It's that is part of the multiverse, that those are the other universes we can explore because there's also already a connection there. With animation, I feel like because you can have all the worlds look vastly different and you can have voice actors, which is much easier, and I'm not saying animation's easier to do than live action. I just think from a scheduling point and a conceptual point, anything is, and you talked about X-Men 97, anything is at the realm of possibility because your imagination, you can put anything in animation, right? Where in live action, I think that's a little bit more difficult to accomplish. And with the multiverse stuff, and I do think it's been up and down. Obviously, the Kang stuff really derails things. I think they're still ultimately going to tell mostly the same story, and we'll get into kind of the panel in 1 second. I think we're wrapping up our thoughts on the movie, but yeah, I think they've only started to touch on that stuff, and unfortunately, you already mentioned it all takes place in the Void, which I think is a good way of doing it because you set that up in Loki. Of that's where you send multiversal garbage, basically, and I just think visually it is a little uninteresting. I agree with you there.
like it
But
doesn't
I
have to
like,
be the whole movie there. That's what I was
yeah,
most
they
kind
could
of
have
like bummed
jumped.
about.
I would have been more interesting jumping universes a little bit more or
Yeah,
something like that, right? And even then with the sling ring at the end, just jumping back to the Deadpool universe, they don't really go anywhere
no.
else,
Well,
right?
because there's the one
Um,
scene where you have Deadpool looking for a Wolverine, which I think is the
oh,
closest
that is the
in
most multiversal, which
multiverse
I
thing, and I
is fun.
wanted
I think it's
more
fun.
of that in terms of
Yeah.
exploring other versions or other worlds. I think that would have been more interesting. I think talking about the laziness of the soundtrack is that you're using the Back to the Future, you know, Power of Love, and so you're referencing a film that, you know, is an iconic time travel movie, and you're also using a song that is synonymous with that film. And then also weirdly, you use another Huey Lewis song, This Is It, right afterwards, which also felt really weird to me, just in
Weird.
terms of
Yeah.
like, why are you using, and that song's not even in Back to the Future. And it just is like, well, why play two Huey Lewis songs back to back? It feels like we're in Patrick Bateman's apartment or something.
Um,
So yeah, so there's some weird stuff there, because like even with Doctor Strange, like in the Multiverse of Madness, there's the one sequence
where they're
where
falling
they're,
through.
yeah, and it's like, oh, like I want to spend, no, spend time there. Ah, now we're gone.
I
You
know.
know,
I think that's just the issue with. I like the idea of where they're going with variants, and I think they've pivoted in an interesting way. Where I will take a positive spin on all of that. Of like, if you have to pivot and retcon, like there is a cool way you can do that with how they're developing their multiverse in a way that you can kind of do it without having to jump to all these different universes. I think Fantastic Four and then the 2 Avengers movies, which we'll talk about, are really going to show that, at least start showing you other universes that are also important, but then bringing that over to the sacred timeline. Let's wrap up our
first
thoughts here.
steps, right? The first steps.
I don't like that subtitle.
I don't either. It sounds really weird.
It's clean. It's cleaner. Just call it Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't understand. A couple other things I want to touch on before we wrap up, where if I have some more negatives, not to focus on the negatives, but I also don't want to just be glowingly positive, because there are other negatives that I didn't love. The villains in the movie, which again in Marvel movies haven't been their strong suit, not great here. I think Emma Corrin, they're doing the best of their abilities with what they're given. I think they're a good actor. But the Cassandra Nova character, other than the kind of visual of like the hand through the face and reading your mind that way, a very more invasive way than what a Charles would do, I think is kind of interesting. And then Mr. Paradox, like Matthew Macfadyen.
Oh God, exposition dump.
Yeah, and I know they poke fun at that and whatever, but like I just don't think Loki is such a great show, and you've had like
Owen Wilson was so good as kind of,
and you've had so many great people in the TVA and stuff like that, and I just felt like the vibes were off with that character, and like it didn't quite work, and he was just villainous for being villainous.
He's evil for evil's sake in order to move the plot forward.
Yeah, and I think the movie, because to give you credit, sometimes just acknowledging that shit and just is like, even saying it's lazy writing or lazy exposition or lazy plot device or something like that, they think they can get away with it by just having that, and it still just calls it out of being like, okay, I get what you're saying, but you still want the villains to either be interesting or captivating. And I like the use of the TVA. I think it completely makes sense, but I don't love him, and I don't love the Cassandra Nova character, like,
or the MacGuffin of the film. It's such a lazy.
It's just thing. Yeah, and they call it out, and it's just kind of, it is what it is. Like, just him being like, I need to destroy universes earlier than they would actually. Like, I like the idea of a, what do they call it, an anchor being and stuff like that. Like,
yeah.
And Logan being that anchor being in the X-Men universe. Like, I kind of like that idea, but then a weird exposition of being like, well, their universe will die in a couple thousand years, but I want to kill it right now because why bother waiting? It's just,
well,
like,
he's a bureaucrat, right? Like I think
yeah,
the point of that character as well is to be like, oh, well, he's kind of almost like, you know, the 50s version of like what Trump is or something, where it's like, we want to create the America that
I want to do it the old way,
the old fashioned way, you know, the white way, the right way, you know, that kind of thing. And
but I don't think that
the heteronormative way, like that's like, but that's kind of like how it reads or what it's trying to do. I don't think it does it well. I will say with Cassandra Nova, like, even though that character doesn't work, and I think maybe it would have worked better if because I kept thinking that was another cameo that would happen, would be either James McAvoy or Patrick Stewart,
or
for the relationship between Charles and Cassandra. But I do think like the one scene where Cassandra Nova's in Wolverine's head, and this is more for Jackman's performance, I think that moment works because Jackman's really good in it, and you also don't have a character that is like undercutting the scene with like a joke. Like, it actually plays like a real scene for a second, and even like the line afterwards where it's like, I'm not going to kill you, you know, when they put the Juggernaut helmet on them. So it's like that kind of works in terms of, but it's I think it's Jackman's performance in that scene more so than the character, the way that they're written.
I totally agree with that. And then one other thing, talking about the cameos or the roles, like with Blade and Elektra and Channing Tatum as Gambit and Daphne Keane and stuff like that, and even Johnny Storm to an extent. I love that they're included. I love, like, you know, celebrating and poking fun at all of those, you know, forgotten or joked about characters. I think when I've heard other people say this too, but like, and I agree, is like, I don't and it kind of brings up your point of the undercutting of Logan's stuff in the movie with Deadpool either joking or someone else. I don't love, even though you're in a Deadpool movie, I think Deadpool should be the only one acting like Deadpool.
Yes.
Or breaking the fourth wall.
Yep.
Or being very silly. The other characters should be played straight. Everyone except for him.
Well, everybody should sound like their own individual person. Where this is the Aaron Sorkin of it all. Where like the criticism that Aaron Sorkin written scripts always get, and I think there's a valid sort of
everyone sounds the same.
Sounds like they're written like Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah.
And it does feel this way with the Deadpool movies.
Everyone's written like Ryan Reynolds or something like that. Like it's so specific things. Johnny Storm talking the way he does, even if it's played as a joke in the post-credits scene. Channing Tatum especially. I'm like, Gambit's not going to be talking coming out of his daddy's pee hole or whatever.
No.
Like it's just like, even if it's played as a joke, and to me it's funny because it's Channing Tatum saying it in a bad Cajun accent, and I'm thinking about 21 Jump Street the whole time. Like I'm laughing, but I'm like, Gambit, and I know I'm being really like nerdy, but like I'm like, Gambit shouldn't be saying that. And
no.
Some of the things, or even like the hyper violent, exploding of bodies or Elektra stabbing people. I know that's how Elektra would kill people in the Daredevil movies or something. Or I guess if you saw how Gambit would eliminate people with his cards and his magic powers and stuff like that, like I guess that's what would happen. But there seems something off seeing the R-rated super violent thing with someone like Gambit throwing a card at someone and them exploding. So that's some of the stuff too, where yes, I had a blast with the movie and I laughed at a lot of it. But once I start to sit and think about certain things, I'm like, I don't necessarily need Gambit making pee-hole jokes or something like that. Like, I almost want Deadpool to act like that, and I'm fine with Deadpool acting like that because I'm used to Deadpool acting like that. But when you have the other characters, as fun as it can be at sometimes, I wish it was balanced a little bit more. Like, even the Chris Evans, that post-credit sequence.
Well, you know what he sounds like in that scene. It's not even like he's obviously written like Deadpool in that moment, but he almost comes off as his character in Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, exactly.
And I like his character in Scott Pilgrim, but it's almost like that feels more like his movie star character in that film than it does. I don't know here.
Yeah, that's the edgelordy stuff of like these characters that shouldn't be saying these naughty words or saying the naughty words.
But that's why also Jackman's performance works, because Jackman does feel still like Logan. Like he doesn't feel like he's been written to kind of be more.
He does say fuck a lot, but like
I know, but that character, and that character's always been kind of ornery and so.
And I think it works. I think Logan is written like he should. I just think some of the other characters, especially in the cameos, feel attacked. Like, I mean, obviously Wesley Snipes' Blade, and I think even Jennifer Garner's Elektra are fine. I think it was just Johnny Storm and Gambit that threw me off a little bit with some of the
but I think even like Mr. Paradox has a little bit of that as well, where he's like, oh, I'm eating my feelings, and like he's eating the sandwich, and it doesn't feel like something, even though we don't know that character very well, it doesn't feel like that's something that character would do.
Deadpool humor, right? Where I almost wish if you're gonna put Deadpool in the MCU, you kept all the MCU stuff, and then he was the R-rated element, right? That's bringing that, like, not characters that would be in the MCU now acting R-rated, even though they wouldn't have acted R-rated. Although we're seeing, an edited version of their lives, and yes, it's a fucking movie. We don't see everything, and maybe people are doing this stuff, and this is how that world works. But that stuff threw me off a little bit too. But overall, to wrap all of this stuff up, I think we had a great back and forth in conversation. I think you got both sides of this movie, and I think ultimately, yes, nowadays everything is extremes. You either love the movie or you fucking hate it. There's no in between. But I think we had a nuanced, interesting conversation of whether you liked it or not. I think there's still a lot. I'd take a movie that has a lot to break down and talk about rather than just being like, middle of the road or something. And I think this shows everyone that you can have a good conversation with someone who disagrees with you. And just make them your best friend, and it makes it much easier. So I'm gonna net out at a 4 out of 5 on the movie. I was higher on it like right away when I got out of the movie. I also took an edible, so I will preface with that. But I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. I still think if you're a sicko like me who has obsessed over the MCU and is still really interested in the MCU, and that flickering flame hasn't quite gone out yet, I think you will get a lot out of this, especially if you've also put in the work over the years watching the Fantastic Fours and the Blades and the Electras, and you go back and rewatch even the bad movies because you just want to consume it all and think about it all. When you said eulogizing a corporation, I understand what you're saying, and I don't lump it all together, but I do think eulogizing films and characters, and especially in an era of early superhero film where not all of them were great, and celebrating the people who did kind of support those movies, I guess, leading up to where we are now of being gigantic $200 million successes, and some of them were huge successes back then too. I'm not trying to deny that, but I know both that credit sequence was both a joke and sincere, and you could tell in the audience when you were there that it started off everyone laughing and then everyone got really silent and just watched it. And I know that's done in other movies too, so it is kind of and even the song choice is funny but then sincere as
also
well.
Ripped off, by the way, I should say,
yeah.
because the last season of Seinfeld, they did a behind the scenes sort of like montage of the whole show and behind the scenes stuff, also scored to Green Day's I Hope You Had the
But I
Time
think
of-"
that's the joke
yeah,
like that
no,
is it.
I
don't think
do,
it's necessarily...
but I don't know if it's like that's the problem where it's like, oh, is this really earned? Because like Ryan Reynolds' whole thing has always been, okay, I'm gonna be sarcastic and goofy, and I don't want to take myself seriously up until I hit you with that emotional thing,
I
that
know,
punch
but I
that
think
you're not
that's fine.
expecting.
It worked for me, so that did work.
Also, no Blade footage because it's still owned by Warner Brothers
for a New Line,
For
right?
New
I
Line,
thought there
yeah.
was something in there. Was there not?
No, there wasn't.
Oh, interesting. Anyways, it's I was surprised that like I just watched that. I was like started off, I'm like, oh, this is funny, and then I was like, oh, this is quite sweet. It worked for me. So I really like the movie. I'm giving it a 4. I'm excited to see it again. I'm excited for the future. Strap in. We're about to talk about the future after, and we're just going to keep it on the same episode because why not? I don't know whether we should break it out or not. Should we break it out?
No, I think we should. I think this should be like almost like a review and like a
post-credit sequence,
post-credit like mini episode of the regular show, because we haven't done one of those in a while. So
yeah, and I know you said 1.5.
1.5, and yeah, I quickly want to say as well, like the other thing, talking about like everybody sounding the same. This isn't a criticism of the film per se, but it's something that I still have a hard time understanding. Or like, is how much do the other characters acknowledge or understand what Deadpool is saying in terms of like him talking to us or making references that are outside of the movie he's in? Do
like the meta stuff?
Do the other characters
hear him?
And I've always kind of been a little bit like there was a joke in Family Guy where it's like, do you guys know that the baby's talking? Like, and so like it kind of feels like that a little bit as well. But also, but Jim Carrey's The Mask, right? Yeah, where there's the scene where he gets shot and then he accepts the award and he's like talking to the audience, but the two guys that are there with him also can see it. Like they're like,
I think in the comics, that's usually what it is. They can see Deadpool turn and talk to someone, and everyone's like, "Who the fuck are you talking to?"
Yeah.
So like, I think it's meant to be like he is doing that stuff, but they just perceive him as
mentally ill.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. 1.5 for me. It's one of those things where it's like I think like a big part of this is you either like this already when you've gotten into the third film of a franchise, even though you're doing a team up movie, which is to draw a bigger audience and you're bringing it into the MCU. But there's a cynical side of this film as well that I feel as though we've talked about the corporate angle of it all. And it's like, to revitalize, a weighing world in a way that maybe isn't as creative as you think. Like, it feels more like a Band-Aid being put on a wound than to actually heal something or to fix something. Like, I don't know if this is like a long-term fix for Marvel, because you can't just make Deadpool movies, in terms of like finding something that's a little bit off the beaten path.
That people that's successful.
Yeah, you need to do more, and I think this is a perfect segue now into, we will probably get more with D23 in terms of like what's happening maybe with the television side of things.
Yeah, I think D23 will focus on animation and television.
Yeah.
Where last night we had the Hall H panel at Comic-Con where they went over really not like their whole new phase state. It
really
was just
three films.
Yeah, three films and then the 2 Avengers movies. Yeah. But do you want me to get into it?
No, you're leading the ship, Captain.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about that. As like we always, I think when we end these reviews for Marvel movies, we like to kind of speculate what's next or the state of the MCU, and I still think we're in a transitional phase because of many different things, whether it's Jonathan Majors Kang and how people perceive the movies and how well they've been doing, although this seems like a shot in the arm this weekend, making a ton of money. But yeah, last night we had the Hall H panel at San Diego Comic-Con from Marvel Studios, where they started it with the Deadpool Wolverine thing. They already had that panel on Thursday night where they brought out all the cast and screened the entire film. But then they talked about 3 films that are all coming out next year. So you have Captain America Brave New World, you have Thunderbolts asterisk, and then you have Fantastic Four The First Steps. Bad name. And then so we'll go over that stuff quickly first. There's not much to say because we weren't there watching the footage. I read some descriptions of what footage they showed and kind of the vibes people had about the movie. So again, take this, we're second party, just reading tweets and seeing what people said from inside the room. So you had Brave New World. They brought out the entire cast. I think the big thing there is Harrison Ford coming out and doing some hulking up on the stage. Showed some footage there. They said that it confirmed that adamantium is kind of the central kind of thing that they're all fighting over in the film. So adamantium being introduced officially in the MCU, because obviously Wolverine and adamantium and Deadpool and Wolverine, but that's a separate universe, even though that movie's part of the MCU. But the MCU proper will have adamantium, and it is about the celestial corpse that's in the ocean.
Eternals has meaning.
Yes, we can rewatch Eternals and it not mean nothing. So the celestial corpse will have adamantium, and then I think it's going to be the world powers all kind of fighting over who gets control of that celestial and this new.
It's basically Wakanda again, right?
Yeah, it is. It's even. I think they'll probably play it off of being either as equally as strong as vibranium or stronger than vibranium, and then you see what vibranium, oh my god, I can't speak, brought to Wakanda. So that's probably why the world powers are all trying to fight over it. I think a cool idea. I'm not completely sold on the movie just because it's nothing against Anthony Mackie, but I never liked Falcon, and
he's not a leading man.
Yeah, that's what I worry about. And I like the vibes it's giving off. I like Thaddeus Ross becoming president, and I like.
Well, once he shaved that mustache, he went from William Hurt to
Harrison Ford. And I get that you're in a tough situation there, so you have to recast that character if you want to continue that. And I think building up Thaddeus Ross and eventually making him president is really cool. I love Harrison Ford. It's just unfortunate with what happened there that they had to recast that role. So I think it will be confusing to some people.
But it's the same thing though with Terrence Howard going to Don Cheadle,
and again,
right? And they made a joke about
it,
and then you move on. You
do, and I'm fine with it. And Harrison Ford's a good enough actor.
Yeah, I don't think William Hurt was in those other movies enough to make that indelible of a mark in terms of his character. The Chadwick Boseman thing was a different situation.
Totally.
Where that was like, okay, if you do recast him, that is a little bit.
This is a side character that has appeared in multiple movies and things like that. So I think it still will be a little confusing to people at first, but I think after this film, we'll be fine with it. We'll see Harrison Ford as Red Hulk in Secret Wars.
What's a Red Hulk? I think what I'm most concerned about with this movie, and again, saving judgment for the final film, is that we have heard so many news reports about reshoots and rewrites, and not just like reshoots are a very normal thing with any production, where you get into, especially with studio stuff, you get into post and the editor will kind of be going through it, and there'll be times where it's like you schedule time for reshoots because it's like, oh well, we maybe need a couple more.
Oh, you always need it, yeah, especially in a big movie.
But with this, there's been conversations about like the testing of the first version of it didn't do well, so they reshot large portions of it. They rewrote characters.
Seems like they brought in Giancarlo Esposito. And now he's one of the main villains.
And I think his scenes were shot back in like March or something like that. And some characters they even wrote out. So like it's like I don't
Seth
know.
Rollins.
Yeah, like I don't know if it's gonna be like some sort of weird like Frankenstein.
The same thing happened with Falcon and Winter Soldier too, right? Like they had to reshoot a bunch of that show and redo it, and we saw how that turned out. It wasn't great, it wasn't horrible, but like it just kind of it was middling, right? And that's what I worry about this being. I worry that we are coming off of a high, whether you liked it or not, with Deadpool and Wolverine, and you have a nice large gap in between movies. I know we're getting Agatha, which, does anyone want that? No offense to anyone involved, but like in October, but then you're coming off of Deadpool and Wolverine going into Agatha All Along, and then this movie. You need it to kind of keep the momentum going, and I know it's got those kind of Winter Soldier vibes, but
which they keep talking about in terms of like playing that up.
Even the Russos coming back during the reshoots and producing it, and I mean, dude, I called it during our Cherry review, and we'll get to that in a second.
Well, the Gray Man and Cherry and Citadel, anything with a C or a G, the Russo brothers have failed.
I said it the minute Cherry happened. I'm like,
as soon as you saw that anal shot, you were just like,
I remember talking to you in that review, and I say, I will bet you $1 million they do the next Avengers movies.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to happen, and they confirmed it. But anyways, going through this, I don't hate the trailer. I like the vibes. I'm not sold as the Falcon becoming Captain America, and I know they're going to play into that, people's thoughts on that. So I like finally bringing up the Celestial. I like bringing Adamantium in. I know Serpent Society. What's the face? What? Are you all right? No, it's okay. Oh, sorry. Love you. Thank you. He just brought me Tums, everyone.
Ooh, nice.
My little snack. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic, but
well, the other thing as well that I'm not looking forward to, and it's not the film's fault, it's this is the problem of fandom, is the woke conversations that we're going to have in discourse where Marvel's become woke, and it's like, well, guys,
we've had those conversations since.
I know, but we're really going to have it with this, and I feel like there's going to be a dark group of people that will be online, like the Star Wars people, where it's like, my America is white,
and they're going to play into that, but like, I think you can't win, because like what I've noticed with Deadpool and Wolverine, you're pandering to one side or you're pandering to the other, or you get the condescending, people who just think Marvel movies are trash and an abomination to art and movies.
Abomination,
like
good call there. I like that.
And then you get the people who think that they're not doing enough and need to do, and you think you're pandering to one side, and then the other side hates you, and then the other side hates it because they think they're pandering to critics or the woke mob or blah 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 blah.
But it's so like, awful how they treat anybody that's not like the stereotypical sort of character comic book design from 1940, and
or
like
even the more recent stuff, like women and people of color,
because I mean that was one thing we didn't really talk about. I think something I liked more, and I'm probably in the minority here, than the Deadpool films and Deadpool and Wolverine, but also had a very negative reaction, and She-Hulk, and like that is, like that's probably never going to come back or anything, but that did feel.
I would say I think the
character will. I don't think there'll be another own show. But
I agree.
But there's a feeling of like, oh, we have to go through, and this is the exhausting part of talking about these movies. It's not talking with you. It's talking about it when it's like, oh man, like do we have to talk about garbage people being assholes to everyone else? It's just like,
and that's what I mean by all sides of that, dude. Whether it's talking down on people who enjoy it or talking down on people who enjoy it because of women and people of color being in main roles. It's just like, it's absurd. It's just like, just shut the fuck up and let people, if you don't like it, move on. We talked about the same thing with Star Wars. Anyways, moving on to Thunderbolts with the asterisk. Whatever that means, I think I don't know whether they're eventually going to call this Dark Avengers or Secret Avengers or something like that, but I have a weird feeling that that's why that's there, and that the actual title of the movie will be Dark Avengers or Secret Avengers.
Or the end of the
like
film,
that.
It'll be like John Carter, and then it's John Carter of Mars.
Yeah, sure. I like the cast for the most part.
Huge Ghost fan.
Yeah, huge Ghost fan. But no, I like, I love Wyatt Russell. I liked his U.S. agent talking about a positive from Falcon and Winter Soldier. I obviously love Florence Pugh. I like that David Harbour's just in full dad bod, giant beard mode again. Great.
He
great,
looks almost
it.
like a rejected, like when he came out in costume, he almost looked like a rejected dollar store version or a Russian knockoff of Turbo Man.
Yeah, I love it. And then obviously Sebastian Stan is the Winter Soldier, who's been around forever too. Like I'm, it's their Suicide Squad.
Is Ford going to be in this as well? Because it is called
no.
Thunderbolts.
So what they've said is that Thunderbolts, it's not named after Thaddeus Ross, which makes me think that they're not actually going to be called the Thunderbolts. Like,
right.
I don't think that that's actually. The movie might be called Thunderbolts, but then I think in the movie it's going to be revealed that they're this version of the Avengers or whatever.
Maybe the file is called Thunderbolts, or it's a classified Thunderbolts, but then it's like you said, like Dark Avengers, or
I think that they won't call them Dark Avengers. I think they might go the Secret Avengers route, to be honest, because I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character isn't necessarily going to think she's dark or
she's Nick Fury.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to make it feel like an evil version of the Avengers, even though that's what people will think, because they're all villains and things like that, or used to be villains at one point, or dark,
or with the Suicide Squad,
Avengers.
even as you already mentioned, being the DC version of that.
Because I always liked Secret Avengers, but Secret Avengers, at least the comic run that I read, was more about actually when Cap wasn't Captain America anymore, and he was just Steve Rogers, and either Bucky or Sam were Captain America at the time. But he was just basically himself without the mask on, almost like what he is in Winter Soldier. But then he runs a Secret Avengers team that is a Black Ops Avengers team, which I assume is what they're going to go for here. Is like you're going to have the pure Avengers, right? Which I guess it might even lead to in Brave New World, because they talk about putting together a new Avengers team and Thaddeus Ross doing it, and maybe it will all be connected, or maybe he'll go to Julia Louis-Dreyfus and maybe the code name or something like that. I didn't hear much about the footage. I don't know much about the movie. I like the Thunderbolts in the comics. I like the idea of bringing together this group of former villains and stuff like that, for better or for worse. Some of them you care more about than others. Ghost is a weird inclusion there, and
it almost felt
Abomination's there too, right?
It almost felt like, okay, what can we fill this roster with? Like some of them make sense just in terms of like a bigger name or a character, like you mentioned Bucky. Even though Bucky, like Winter Soldier, Sebastian Stan, there's just something about him that just does not work for me as an actor. And so like I'm going in this and purely like on the concept, and also like the Men on a Mission, Dirty Dozen type movie, right? Which is what the Suicide Squad was, where like that could be fun for a Marvel movie, and seeing that. But there is something about the group that does almost feel like a grab bag in a way of Marvel characters, and not like there's a part of me where it's like you could go back and pick some interesting anti-heroes or villains, or bring somebody in that's like more like the Punisher. I think would be a good person to bring into this, or something like that, something that feels a little bit more like has weight, like Taskmaster and Ghost.
And Ghost are a weird choice, but you got to think they're doing. I really do think they're going the Secret Avengers or Dark Avengers route, right? Because you have a Black Widow, you have a Captain America, You have a Hulk with Abomination. So I think they're trying to kind of go, and then Taskmaster's that one that is kind of because they can copy the moves of everyone. Be that like I do think the Ghost and the Ghost inclusion is kind of strange. I guess maybe because it's sort of techie, but like I don't know. It could be interesting, but I think it's way too early, and I didn't see any of the footage. But like it's we should get a trailer probably soon-ish.
Will
right?
probably be by the end of the year, right? Because you look
yeah.
at the release dates for the three sort of main films that they were focusing on. You have
February, May,
February,
July,
May,
right?
and July. So those are like that's where I can also see people getting sick of Marvel again, where it's like we got really
No
nothing.
way. I'm calling it now. No way. Fantastic Four comes out in July. There's no
You're
way.
probably
They're
right. You're
starting
probably
to
right.
shooting-
But
they're shooting it starting this week.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no way.
Yeah.
There's no
well,
way.
also
It's coming
you just
out in
feel
November.
so bad for the VFX people too, where it's
That's what
like,
I mean. So that's what I mean by there's no way it comes out in July. It's
Yeah.
coming out in that's for investors and investors only to be like, we got 3 movies in the first quarter or whatever, the first half of the year.
Yeah.
Fantastic Four will come out probably in November, is my guess, or December.
And that's still pushing it probably
Yeah,
for
I know.
a lot of
That's
people
what
that
I
are
mean.
working on
Or
it.
it might even get punted to the next year. But then, okay, let's lead into it. Fantastic Four, we'll briefly talk about. They brought out the cast. They showed some test footage that they shot on a soundstage, which had the 60s WandaVision kind of vibe to it with Matt Shackman directing. I really do like this
The
portion that they
Shackman.
put together. I like that it's taking place in a retro futuristic New York. So it's an alternate. It is a different universe. It's not the sacred timeline.
It's the
right?
Jetson universe.
Yeah, which the Jetson verse. Finally, the Jetsons made it to the MCU. So they brought out a really. They tried to do something cool with bringing out the Fantastic Car, but it looked kind of corny and bad. But the footage I've heard, people really vibed with it. They like Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic, and it seems like we'll get a lot of Eben Moss-Baccarat as Ben Grimm before he becomes the Thing.
Before he becomes John Carpenter's the Thing.
Yeah, and I like the vibe. I like, and you got Galactus in the film, which I'm assuming will get kind of a downer ending as that universe gets eaten by Galactus or whatever, and they escape obviously to the sacred timeline because so it's kind of seems predictable in my mind of what will happen, especially that they confirmed that they will be in the 2 Avengers movies.
Well, Galactus probably is going to be a part of like Secret Wars too, right? Like it seems like
with Doom being the ultimate villain now. So that's all about Fantastic Four. I'm excited for it. I think there's no way it comes out in July unless Matt Shackman and his TV background can come up with an aesthetic that is more practical and doesn't necessarily need. I mean, Galactus is going to be a huge special effect, but I'm curious to see. He did a good job with WandaVision, and I'm again cautiously optimistic about Fantastic Four. I really like the cast. I like Ralph Ineson as Galactus.
That's a good casting choice. That voice is amazing, and it's not something that feels algorithmic in terms of like Pedro Pascal. I like him a lot, but it does feel a little bit like we've gotten a lot of that because it's like you have a moment like any movie star or any person that's in the moment is used for everything, and it kind of does feel like I haven't gotten sick of him or anything, but it does feel like someone was referencing that we're going to get one Avengers movie and the Grogu and Mandalorian movie in May.
Both of those movies,
and it's like,
and that's a lot.
And they're both like big.
And Last
films.
of Us probably in January or February, right?
Yeah.
And so I agree. I love Pedro Pascal. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm sick of him yet, and I don't want to because I do genuinely think he's a great guy, and I think he is good in most things that I see him in. I just worry that we will get to the point of being like this fucking guy again.
Yeah.
Also
I didn't mention this on the A Quiet Place review, but Joseph Quinn does look a lot like Robert Downey Jr. to the point I wonder if they'll play with that in some way in one of the Avengers films, because he does. He really looks like
he does
a young Robert Downey Jr.
I see that. Okay, and then the biggest news. So those were the three films we already knew about, and then we expected we would get some sort of pivot from Kang Dynasty, and oh boy, we did.
I can't believe Krang is playing
Yeah.
Doom.
So the big news, which we started to see circling on social media in the last couple weeks, we got that report that the Russo brothers, uh, in a bout of, call it desperation or perfect alignment from everyone of being in a low
The
point.
Citadel effect.
Yeah, everyone being, both Marvel being at a low point and the Russos being at a low point after leaving, making two of the biggest movies of all time.
The Gray Man and Cherry, you're talking about.
Yeah,
Two of the biggest
are
movies
coming
of all
back
time.
together, and I think it's, I don't know. I'm on the side that them coming back, I'm totally fine with, because
I'd
those
rather them
Avengers
there.
movies- yeah, that's what I mean too, man. And you can, whatever you think about, like, those two movies, I think work really well for, or the four movies that they directed, really all worked exceptionally well for that universe and universe building and what Marvel was doing. And yeah, is it going back, and would you like them to have fresh voices and fresh whatever? But for something as gigantic as these two Avengers movies need to be, like, playing it, quote unquote, I think playing it safe is bringing back the Russos. I think the other thing we're about to talk about is not playing it safe. Um, it is, you can argue it in many different ways, but I think the Russos coming back makes sense. I think it's a good decision at this point. When you were talking about, you had Daniel Destin Cretton, you had Shawn Levy being in the running at one point. I'd prefer the Russos over Levy at this point, just because they've done it. You kind of know what you're going to get. They did a good job with those two movies. They know how to handle
their factory supervisors.
Yes. And that's fine. And that's what you kind of need for a movie as big as the Avengers. I don't necessarily need the Avengers to be pushing the boundaries of what a movie can be and what cinema can be, right? Like, I don't need an individual voice on an Avengers movie.
I don't need Gray Man 2 or Cherry 7.
But you know what I mean by when we talk about how we like bringing in, when the James Gunns came in, when the Shane Blacks came in, when, like, people with,
but it doesn't always work though either, right?
It doesn't.
Chloe Zhao, right?
Yeah, but I appreciate that they do that. But
and she's also a better filmmaker than the Russo brothers. But the Russo brothers, like I said, are like,
know what to do.
They're admins, right? Like they keep the factory going. They
and they know what works in the factory and how to run it well.
Outside of the factory,
they're fucked. So and that's why they're like perfect bedfellows, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, it's like the exes, to bring it back full circle. Is like, you broke up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your partner,
significant other,
and then you get back together because you're like, ooh, what's out there, it wasn't really working, and like, it's maybe let's try this again. And sometimes that can work and sometimes it can't, and it might work for a couple movies and then they'll go again, or they'll be the factory supervisors that will continue to make Avengers movies until they die, and that can be fine. It's like, I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with that, because those movies have gotten so gigantic and there's such a culmination of so many different voices and so many different stories, that if you have someone that can kind of put that together in a package that is entertaining, I don't think it's a bad choice to have them come back for an Avengers movie. Like, Sam Raimi could have been interesting. I don't think Shawn Levy would have been the same thing, of just a guy who's organizing it all. But I trust the Russos more than that, of just being like,
oh, they have the track record, right?
You've done it, and you've done it well, successfully, whatever well is in your vocabulary. Even if you like those movies or you don't, it was a good culmination of many years of universe building and things like that. So
it's like Homer Simpson going back to the power plant when he tries to start a bowling job, and then Mr. Burns is like, you're gonna be here forever.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And sometimes you're good at one thing, you're not good at other
although
things,
I would say
right?
Homer, I don't know if is the best at keeping a good power plant.
I just mean anyone, right? You might try a different job and you go, ooh, I'm not good at that, and I'm good at this.
You might think you're Martin Scorsese, Anthony Russo, and then you're actually fucking not.
Yeah, and I mean it as a compliment. Really, like, I think any of their movies after the Avengers worked. And I think you go back to the safe thing, and I mean, it could be risky because if you don't do it well again,
then you're really
ruined.
shit out of luck at
yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't be so hard on them if it was, and it's not the one brother seems to be very like, you know, doing his own thing and what
but some
have
of the
you.
comments
But
and shit, right,
the stuff that Anthony Russo said, like, you know, the Scorsese stuff, like,
and then even the movie theater thing, right, when they started making
and it's just like that dude was putting his mouth in his foot, and I think he opened the floodgates to criticism and people
and I
not
think
liking
that's
him.
totally fair. Yeah, and I think that's all totally fair. Okay, and then the biggest thing, which started as a rumor, I think I saw a week ago, but it didn't seem like they were going to go that route. It seemed like they tried to go that route, but it didn't work out. But I think with the Russos coming back, probably convinced this other person to come back.
Well, also everything that was going on with Kang, right? Because Kang was supposed to be the villain in Avengers 4 how many Comic-Cons was it ago where it was announced that it was the Kang Dynasty, right? Like that was the whole sort of first part of it. So everything with Jonathan Majors and how Marvel, you know, botched that handling of the situation, it felt like, okay, that was a real turning point to where like Kevin Feige was talking about like going to these retreats and trying to rework certain things. And so I think like the direction that I think Kang's story is done, because I think the other thing that people
they finished that in TV in Loki.
Yeah, because I think what people were expecting to hear this weekend was the possibility of someone playing Kang, like someone else,
like a recast. Yeah. So the news we did get: Robert Downey Jr. returning to the MCU, playing Doctor Doom. We don't know if it's Victor Von Doom or what he's essentially playing. I'll get into some theories in a second.
It's not Victor anymore. It's Vic.
Yeah. But you have RDJ returning for both Doomsday and Secret Wars. And if you look at the color schemes of those two logos, one is very Doctor Doom-ish and one is very Iron Man-ish. So you can kind of see where they're going there, which, you know what? I don't know. This is very comic booky to me too. Like, characters come back from the dead all the time. They bring back alternate versions of the characters. This is what comic books are. So I try to see it from an optimistic point of view and not a cynical point of view, because again, they're all just silly comic book movies. Who fucking cares? So like, if they're bringing back your biggest hero who sacrificed himself in your biggest movie of all time, it started with him, it ended with him, bringing him back as your multiversal villain, if you're doubling down on the multiverse stuff, even though you had to pivot, I think is the ultimate pivot, and a really, really cool pivot. There's a character that I don't know a ton about, but I'm starting to read a lot of the Ultimate comics again, and the whole series, called The Maker. And spoilers a little bit if you don't want to know anything about it. The Maker is a alternate universe version of Reed Richards, who gets broken down so far that he becomes this multiversal kind of villain, and fighting with other Reed Richards and being kind of a foil to both the Fantastic Four and the whole Marvel universe. He universe hops and things like that. So I think, and in the comics, there's a What If comic where Tony Stark does become Doctor Doom, which I want to read. I have it on Marvel Unlimited now. And there's some other ones where Doctor Doom becomes Iron Man, the other way around. But I love the idea that you've already played with variants, you've played with other versions of characters. Like, if you can get the guy who started it all to come back and now play a villain, and ultimately he'll play Iron Man again and a hero and probably save the day again. I think it's a cool pivot. I think, the idea is cool. What I don't like is people, much like when Michael Keaton got announced as Batman or Heath Ledger as the Joker and things like that, like just shitting on casting without even knowing what they're going to do. Yeah, you can shit on the idea of casting, just like I'm supporting the idea of casting. But I think it's really cool bringing him in as an alternate version of Tony Stark, and we'll think of him as the alternate version of the MCU Tony Stark, who's been so broken that he is the guy that ultimately is the ultimate big baddie in the multiverse saga. And I think that's really cool because that's what you set up in the multiverse, is that there's alternate versions of these characters. So if you bring your biggest hero and make him your biggest villain, I think that could be a cool idea. Will they be able to execute on it? Time will tell. How early they start setting this up. Is he just going to show up in Doomsday? Is he going to have a cameo in Fantastic Four or something else?
Will he be in Fantastic Four sequels as well as the Doctor Doom?
I don't think you do that.
No, I don't either. But you never know, because when you read the press release or when you look at the information, it's for these two films.
Yeah,
I think
there will be a post credits.
Sure, absolutely. But in terms of like what he's fulfilling, in terms of like, I think maybe some people, because I agree with you, like from a comic book point of view, it works. Like I get it. I think maybe for some people though as well, like, there is a little bit of a difference with the casting of Keaton going from Batman to the Vulture. I think it's because it's in the same MCU, and it's because we've talked a little bit about this with even like, Chris Evans and Michael B. Jordan and things like that. It does feel sometimes like, oh, are we just recycling through the same group of actors? Because I'm sure, because like the name that kept coming up with Doctor Doom, there were two names. One was Cillian Murphy, which was his Oppenheimer co-star, and the other name that came up was Mads Mikkelsen. And Mads Mikkelsen actually, I think, is a good choice. It's just he was also in Doctor Strange as a villain and wasted in that. So
I agree, but my argument here is that I don't think he's going to be playing Tony Stark. He's not playing Victor Von Doom.
No, right? I know that, and that's why it'll be fine.
That's why I think it works. And I think him playing Doctor Doom, I think, is the thing people are hung up on, right? Because they think you're wasting Doctor Doom by just making him a Tony Stark variant. Because Doctor Doom is a compelling villain. He's his own person. There's a whole story you could do with Victor Von Doom, of being, and maybe they'll go the Mandarin route where there will be a real Victor Von Doom, and that's how this Tony Stark co-opted that name, right?
Played by Tony Leung.
And I think that's ultimately probably what you do. Is this version of Tony Stark is calling himself Doctor Doom, but he is not Victor Von Doom. He is Tony Stark. So I think maybe my one criticism is you probably could have called him the Maker and no one would have given a shit, right? Or you could have called him anything, like a new name, and him being an alternate version of Tony Stark as the villain, and it doesn't need to be Doctor Doom. But I think Doctor Doom is such an integral part of Secret Wars and things like that the pivot from Kang went to Doom, and they go, how do we do that quickly and make people understand it and make it work? Is you make it a character that they already know, who is Tony Stark, who is the biggest superhero and the most famous one and the one everyone will know. And he will be played as, this is an evil version of Iron Man calling himself Doctor Doom. He's going to have a silver Iron Man mask with a green hood, and it's not going to be Victor Von Doom. It'll just be an Iron Man variant calling himself Dr. Doom.
Doug Van
He'll
Doom.
Probably have you'll probably see him kill Thanos and have an Infinity Gauntlet, and he'll be the most powerful being in the fucking multiverse, right? And and them fighting, when you have all the Avengers coming back, or imagine Spider-Man or anyone, and you see that it's Tony Stark, but you can't fathom it's this alternate version of him who is an evil piece of shit. Like, that's fucking cool to me, or it could be cool.
Well, it's a psychological thing, right? Because I know people are already saying like, oh, how's that going to affect Peter Parker? How's that going to affect, like Rowdy? Like it has the potential to kind of
have good character moments too.
And like you said, like, I think a good point that you made is that you don't necessarily have to tell the Victor Von Doom story that everybody wants, because you're telling the Victor Von Doom story as though he were Iron Man. So people you don't need to like spend too long on, a backstory and things like that, right? It's already set up.
You'll have some exposition or some backstory that this version of Tony Stark, all this shit happened to him, or he was sent to Battle World or the Void or whatever, and he's lived in this solitude, or he's been traveling the universe to try to Pepper, something about Pepper being fucking. No, they've already done that with Doctor Strange. I don't know what the crux of it will be, but like some horrible shit happens to him that makes him, a cynical fucking asshole who controls the multiverse. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have a scene of him destroying Thanos and a scene of him going to the Council of Kangs and just absolutely destroying them.
They won't have Kang because I don't think they're going to even recast it.
But I mean, even I don't think so either. But even just the scene of like even if it's old footage or
they'll just mention like it in like
I killed every version of Kang or whatever because he was a useless piece of shit or whatever. I do have to wrap.
Or I didn't even bother. The ants got him for me.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great line, right? I do have to wrap, so we'll get final thoughts here. I just wanted to put some optimism on it because I've seen a lot of people online. Maybe it's a vocal minority. I don't know, but I think you just have to wait and see. I think you can have an initial reaction to stuff. I'm just trying to give the side of being like, they're silly comic book movies. Let them be comic booky and silly with actors coming back from the dead and whatever. And like, I know you want this perfect bow on certain things, but that's never happened in anything. Like everyone always comes back. We always, to quote Thanos, I am inevitable. Like this was inevitable.
Oh, I thought
like,
you said I am an edible.
Yeah, I did have one. I just think it was inevitable that Chris Evans was going to come back, that Robert Downey Jr. was going to come back, that the Spider-Men were going to come back, blah, 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 blah. And I don't think it necessarily ruins their legacy. Even Logan and bringing it back full circle in this review. I think they let that version of Wolverine have its ending and they poke fun at it. But that ending in Logan still matters. I watched it the other night. I still think that ending shot is amazing. And I still think it's worth something. Our Tony Stark saying, I am Iron Man, snapping out and saving the universe and killing Thanos and saving everyone still means something. I don't think that they're going to ruin that. They could. I don't think that they will. I think what they're doing can be very cool of making him a villain. I'm excited for it. I think it's the shot in the arm that we need, pivoting from Kang. And they could completely shit the bed. Who knows? But I think bringing back the safe choices to do that, I think the actors probably like them because they've worked with them on multiple movies. And I think they're the ones that could probably convince a lot of people to be in that movie, at least from the MCU side of things. You might have some more convincing from the Fox side or the Spider-Man side and things like that. But those are my final thoughts. I'm excited. And I think the combo of Hall H and Wolverine and Deadpool this weekend gave me a punch in the dick of being a little bit kind of, again, I'll use the term again, cautiously optimistic and curious of how this rest of this multiverse saga will go. Final words from you, Eric, then we got to wrap.
Yeah, I think it's all about context. I think like you have to see how it plays out in terms of the movies. And, you mentioned the whole Deadpool and Wolverine thing about like the worst Wolverine and there being other versions of it. And even with, Chris Evans coming back to play Johnny Storm in a cameo, it's like, okay, well, what makes that any less sort of dramatic or different compared to what we're doing here? Yeah, like tonally they'll be different, obviously. Tony Lee, they'll be different. But there is an aspect of it where it's like, okay, well, like this is, like you said, it's a comic book movie. These things happen. Like it's also a soap opera in a way.
Yeah,
like
I mean.
Nobody has a problem with Michelle Rodriguez coming back a gazillion times in the past movies.
Just be open to it. It's stupid.
But I think because people take it so seriously, that's where we've gotten to that point now. I think the only thing I would be critical of Robert Downey Jr. coming back is that he did seem a little bit snide when it came to
the press tour on
Oppenheimer, and when he wins the Oscar, and it's like, oh well, I'm above that now, and it's like, well, no, money talks.
Immediately goes back.
Yeah, like a giant truck of money comes into his his driveway, and it just like leaves it there, and it's like, okay, well, you're not that
money talks, baby.
And I also do think like it does, like as an actor, it does give him something else to do
to play with
the character, because it's like you got to think like, okay,
coming back to be Iron Man, I think, is the safe thing.
Yeah, and he might phone it in more, right? Where this time around, he might be more interested in coming back as playing an asshole.
I think I can't wait to see it. Anyways, I do have to go. Yep. I have to go see my new house I'm going to go live in. So,
that's important.
And we have a time that we have to go. So, thank you all for listening. This was I love that Eric and I got back to a 2-hour plus episode. We haven't done this in a long time. A very fun very good conversation. Go check us out on Letterboxd, Untitled_movies. Follow me on social media at Matt Rohrbeck. Go watch Eric's other reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and follow him at EM6211 everywhere. Until next time.
Let's fucking go.